Who's that guy in that old shirt? Who must be the fence expert? Who's that guy in that old shirt? Who must be the fence expert? Time to talk about the fences. It's time to discuss operations and expenses. It's time, it's really time to elevate small businesses. It's time for Joe to drop his knowledge. It's relentless. This rhyme of mine is getting a bit ridiculous. Here we go. We're live with Joe. Enjoy the show.
Guys, I am so excited to bring to you part 2 of the series of Assembling Your Financial Dream Team with the one and only Andrew Martin. If you guys haven't caught the previous episode, go ahead and do it. If you haven't watched the other episodes in general with Andrew Martin, I think you should take some time to do that as well. Andrew, without further ado, let's get into it. All right, guys, welcome back to part 2 of Building Your Financial Dream Team with Andrew Martin. If you haven't caught part 1, it doesn't necessarily rely on part 1, but you should go back and watch part 1 right after this. It'll still make sense, I promise. Andrew, for the folks that maybe haven't seen us interview before and haven't seen part 1, maybe a brief introduction.
Yeah, so I own Atlas Financial Strategies. We're a fee-based financial planning and business planning firm. And so our job, I feel like, is to kind of consolidate everything into one place as it pertains to the planning. So and put a plan together, taking into consideration the tax, legal, and financial implications of the plan.
So one thing we talked about a little bit last time, and I feel like we'll still take through this, is the importance of having a quarterback that manages the other professionals in the dream team. And what it sounds like is you guys more often than not are comfortable holding that role as the quarterback that interacts with the other professionals in the dream team.
Yeah, so a conversation we have with most clients, but particularly with business owners, because business owners are generally or hopefully going to have a good CPA, which is kind of what we talked about last time. They should or hopefully have a financial planner or somebody kind of like us on their team. Hopefully they have one or two different types of attorneys on their team, and they might have a bookkeeper. They might have other professionals as part of that team. And kind of unknowingly, I find a lot of business owners are like, I have all these people, so everything's taken care of. But all of those professionals are kind of working in their silos and not communicating, collaborating, cross-pollinating, whatever you want to call that, right? And so somebody, right, our right hand has to know what our left hand is doing, right? So somebody has to be in charge of pulling all the pieces together to make sure that they all kind of make sense. And that duty a lot of time falls upon the client kind of unknowingly. And generally, the client probably is not best suited to act as the quarterback / coach / coordinator of that team. So, we don't know what we don't know. And that lack of communication between professionals, I could bore you with a lot of stories, but just ends up letting a lot of things slip through the cracks. And sometimes those are little easily fixable things. Sometimes they are not as easy to fix.
Sure. I grew up with Bob Vila, and he always said, if you're not a professional, hire a professional for the best results, or something to that effect. I feel like that's kind of the conversation we're having right now.
Yes, sir. Yeah. And I agree with that sentiment 100%.
Absolutely. So we talked about CPAs, tax filing versus tax planning, and then accountants and bookkeepers last time. So the first two, and these aren't really maybe in order of importance. These are all important.
Sure.
This time, I think what I'd like to talk about, and you alluded to it a little bit, is investment manager versus financial planner. They sound the same, but likely they operate a little bit differently. And then attorneys, that having a business and a personal or an estate planning attorney as well.
Yes, sir. Yeah. So as far as my industry is concerned, when it comes to asset manager, wealth manager, whatever we're going to call it, versus financial planner, I blame the industry for a lot of the woes of the industry. So, and a lot of the kind of misconceptions and stuff that people have. So I you meet somebody and they ask what you do, and I say financial planning and stuff, and they want to immediately start talking about the market or investments or something like that. And I'm happy to oblige, but
Sure.
That is a piece, and a relatively small piece, a piece nonetheless of your, all-encompassing financial plan. Like, there's so many pieces to it that aren't those things. But the reason I blame the industry is because the majority of the industry, if I have to guess, I'd say probably 95% or so, work in such a way that, number one, it only makes sense for them to work with people who have a meaningful amount of money that they're willing to give to, the client is willing to give to the advisor to manage for them and things like that. And they'll charge the 1 or 2% fee or whatever to manage that money. And then I find that most of the advice kind of begins and ends with how to invest that money. And the advice generally does not bleed into what I would consider to be all the other important parts of a good, well-rounded financial plan, which includes debts and insurances and your estate planning and your asset protection and your savings and your overall long-term plan and taxes and all the stuff. There's so many things that are part of a, what I would consider to be a good, solid financial plan. And that leaves a lot of people unserved or underserved because,
Sure.
So when I say a meaningful amount of money, a lot of the firms that people would recognize the names of, the advisors don't get paid anything on accounts under $250,000. You're still paying fees,
Oh, wow.
but the advisor doesn't make any. All those fees goes to the firm. The advisor doesn't make any money on those small accounts. I say small, not small, but in their eyes, small.
Sure. Yeah.
Um,
Relative. Yeah.
so, right. And I have a buddy that, he's a asset management guy, and he has a minimum of $2.5 million. So if you don't have $2.5 million that you're willing to give to him to manage for you, you're not a client for him. So it feels a little like contingent, right? Like, oh yeah, I'm happy to work with you if you have enough money for it to make sense for me, right? So, and that you're willing to give me and stuff like. So I just think there's a rather glaring and large conflict of interest with that, because let's say somebody came in here with X amount of dollars, $1 million, and they say, hey, I inherited $1 million. I won the lottery. Who cares? Whatever, right? I have this money. What should I do with it? The traditional advisor is generally going to kind of dive right into, here's a portfolio, here's what we would do with it, here's how we would invest it, things like that. There's generally not a lot of discovery. There's not a lot of conversation about what I would consider to be, good conversation to have with clients before. It'd be like going to a doctor and they immediately start prescribing you stuff without doing any diagnosis, right? So if they do that, they're just trying to sell you something. They're not actually trying to solve a problem for you. And so I feel like a lot of the, a lot of the industry is doing the same thing. When instead of, if that person came to me with that money, maybe some of that money should go towards paying down debts. Maybe some of it should go towards padding savings. Maybe some of it should go towards investing in real estate or investing back into the business or anything other than investing in a stock bond portfolio or something like that. And maybe that is the correct answer for that. But also there's a lot of other options that should be considered. So I always tell people the most expensive advice you'll get is free advice. And if you're not paying your advisor or planner for their time and advice, the advice that they give you has to be something that makes them money, or it's not a business, right? So, and I'm not saying it needs to be us. I mean, I know I'm partial because we do things this way and I believe it to be the correct way. But I'm generally speaking, I think it makes a lot more sense for people to work with a planner that charges for their time and advice. So that way the advice they give you doesn't have to be something that makes them money. They can give you hopefully impartial, thorough, conflict-free advice because you have paid for their time. And without that, there's not a good way for them to manage any conflict of interest. So I just think that you should ask the right questions when interviewing your potential planner or advisor or what have you, to make sure that, number one, they are a fiduciary, and that means that they have the legal obligation to make sure whatever advice they give you, they are able to prove is the best possible solution, not just a good solution, but the best possible solution, that they're able to manage conflict of interest and hopefully there is no conflict of interest or very, very little. You should ask them what they specialize in, how often you're going to meet with them, if they're, what all they'll help you with. Do they just help with investment management, or do they help with taxes? Do they help with debt? Do they help with savings? Do they help with, estate planning and asset protection and all the things? Or are they just there to show you what stock bond portfolio they'll put you in? So there's a very, very big difference, I think, in a asset manager, wealth manager, financial advisor, whatever, and what I would consider to be a financial planner, which again takes into consideration everything, your tax, legal, and financial implication of your plan, to make sure that everything is cohesive and working together in the most efficient way to do whatever it is that you are trying to do with your life, which will involve your finances in some way.
Sure. So what I'm hearing, and I just want to clarify, is that a financial planner could act as an investment manager, just in saying, hey, we should probably invest in these things, but we should also consider X, Y, and Z other things that maybe on the investment manager side, maybe they're not doing it intentionally. Maybe they're just offering what they've got available to them. So it sounds like one might be a much more limited scope as opposed to the other.
That's right. Yeah. So I always tell clients it's our job, or I view it as our job, number one, to educate, because we're not taught these things, which we could go down a rabbit trail of, down that rabbit trail of why aren't we taught these things, and we should be, and all the stuff, which I think most people would agree on. But we're not taught these things. So human nature is we avoid what we don't understand. So people avoid these things, or they're afraid of it just because the lack of education on it. So a big part of my job is not to tell you what to do with your money necessarily. I mean, if you're asking my 2 cents, I'll give it to you, but to help you make decisions. With every choice we have to make, there's usually options. It's my job, if there's a multitude of options, to hopefully boil it down to the few best options, and then explain these options, how they work, the pros and cons, all the stuff, add perspective if needed, to hopefully arm the client with the information necessary to help them make the decision, not to make the decision for them. Again, if clients ask my opinion, I'll give it to them, but this is their life and their money, not mine. So, unfortunately, fortunately or unfortunately, our finances will, have a direct impact on just about every part of our life, right? Even things that you wouldn't necessarily assume that they do, they do. And I feel like most people are doing good things, right? They're like, I'm paying debt, I'm saving, I'm investing, all objectively good things, but I don't know if what I'm doing is the most efficient way to do what I'm trying to do. And I don't know if what I'm doing is going to help me reach the long-term goals that I have for myself, whatever those goals might be. So number one, we need to identify what those goals are. But number two, we need to make sure that the path we're on, I feel like most people are like, I'm heading in the general direction, but I don't know if I'm on the most direct path. So it's like, I use the analogy. It's like, if you're on a plane going from New York to LA, if on takeoff, if that plane is just a couple degrees off, you're going to end up in Mexico and not LA, right? Just by being 3 degrees off on takeoff, right? So, but you just keep going down that path, and you're like, well, I'm heading in the direction, but you're going to end up in Tijuana, not LA.
Yeah. It's going to feel like you're going the right way. You're headed east.
Right.
Kind of. At some point you get off of the path, but you're like, hey, I'm still heading east. I'm still heading into the sun. We're headed the right direction. But yeah, it could have very, very different results. And I feel like that gets back to, you don't know what you don't know, right? So like, I feel like a lot of people know the basics. Don't take on more debt than you can afford, earn more than you spend, and, just kind of the very basics. But to your point, with a little bit more clarity and direction, you can be more efficient with the path of getting from A to B. You very well could still get there, but you might pass O and N on your way back to getting back to point B. Just being more efficient with your routing, maybe.
Yeah, the efficiency really is extraordinarily important. And it's surprising to a lot of people, so particularly for younger people, right? It's usually just little inefficiencies. There's just little things like, if we tweak this, change this, tweak that, fix this inefficiency, do this instead of that, whatever it is, like those tweaks compounded over a multi-year or multi-decade period of time ends up making an enormous difference. And they're usually not huge changes to what they're doing. They're just little tweaks. All right, do this instead of that, and so on and so forth. But generally, when we run those numbers out for people, it usually makes a hundreds of thousands of dollars difference, or very often millions of dollars difference through their retirement plan, just by fixing these little inefficiencies over a long period of time. So if we knew that, hey, I'm probably missing out on, let's just use a nice round number. Let's just say 500,000. Like, hey, if I knew what these little inefficiencies were, and I knew that it would if I could kind of easily fix this, and it puts an extra $500,000 in my pocket at some point down the road, would I want to fix that? I feel like the answer is pretty obvious, but that's usually what it is. I mean, we without exception, these little tweaks make an enormous difference over the long period of time. But if we don't know that we're making or that we have these little inefficiencies in our plan, we're never going to correct it.
Well, and I feel like that gets back to the overall subject in that having each professional do their professional job, but having somebody quarterback it that says, hey, I know which route we're trying to take. We need to plug these people in at these moments. Or I mean, every road's going to have a few bumps in it, right? Or a few detours. Okay, we're off track. Here's how we get back. Let's bring this person in and this person in. I feel like they could work together to get us back kind of on the path we're looking towards. But if you don't have someone with that vision, then one, you may not even know you're on a detour until you're so far gone. And two, you may not put the right people in at the right points either.
Yeah, and every professional kind of has their lens of things that they view things through that will color the advice that they give, right? So there might be something that could be worth a business owner, let's say, considering that the CPA might not be in favor of, but the attorney is going to strongly be in favor of, and they're both correct in some senses, right? Because they're looking at things through their lens. So sometimes we'll take, that third party or the mediator or whatever you want to call it to kind of like, all right, well, there's got to be a middle ground here somewhere. How can we do this in a way that's going to make the most sense for everybody? And so we'll, speaking for us at least, we'll generally, have meetings with the other professionals on the team and kind of all come together. Multiple heads are always better than one. And again, everybody has their way that they view things. And so as long as everybody's willing to kind of participate and buy in and on the client's plan and come together and collaborate, man, when that works well, it is really a beautiful thing. We've had meetings where it's like, hey, we're looking at doing this thing. What's your thoughts? Hey, well, we could do it this way. Yeah, that makes sense. I'll do this to do that. Anyways, and we put it together and it's like, all right, we end the call with, hey, CPA, all right, your role, let's get to work. Mr. Attorney, your role, let's get to work. I know mine, we'll get to work. We'll come back in X amount of time and, see what we've come up with and kind of put all this together. And it just works beautifully. And all this is kind of happening behind the scenes for the business owner, which, again, which is presumably what they want, to not be always directly involved with it.
Sure.
But, it takes somebody doing that to not have so many things slip through the cracks. And again, some of those things that slip through the cracks are relatively small and can be easily be fixed. And some of them are not as easy to fix, but it's worth having somebody that can look at everything instead of this silo. And again, I'm not saying it needs to be us. There's other firms that work like us, I'm sure.
Sure. Well, and an example I'll use is something I've had experience with was life insurance, saying the question was, well, how much life insurance do you need? It's a great question. How do I find the answer? I don't know. The answer I have is just enough. I don't want too much. I don't want too less. I want the Goldilocks of insurance amounts. And then that person says, I don't know what to tell you. For some people, that answer is 500,000. For some people, that answer is 5 million. Whatever the number is, it's going to be different. And I say, okay, well, how do I find the answer? And they're like, how much debt do you have? Maybe if you were to disappear tomorrow and you didn't want to pass that debt to your family, how much would it take to make that go away? Like, oh, okay, that's a number I can find. Sure. But it was me trying to come up with that answer as a fence guy, right? Whereas if I'd had someone with experience and that had a lens or a just an overall view of everything to say, okay, so let's look at this, let's look at this, let's put these together, and this is probably the appropriate number. That would probably be a better answer than my answer was, well, this much, and then let's add some, just in case, because of inflation and this and that. I don't know. To which and I consider that professional a friend. So it's not like, but of course he says that's a great idea. He doesn't have an opinion. He said, okay, if you feel good with that amount, I can secure you that amount. That's my job. That's my role. So in that example, I feel like, again, having somebody that has more experience than I do and has a view of all the pieces on the board probably would have come maybe to a different number. But
Well,
but it's important to have somebody with that view, I guess.
absolutely. And I know this isn't maybe necessarily where you're going with it, but I can give you a 2-minute easy life insurance need calculation that everybody can do back of napkin. We have a video on our YouTube channel about that specifically, as well as all sorts of other stuff.
Okay.
But it's a really easy back of the napkin way, I think, for people to do this. So
yeah,
generally, I think for people like us, young, have kids, maybe maybe we're married, have kids, all the stuff. So for business owners, I will say there's kind of two. There's your personal life insurance need, and then you might have a business life insurance need, either for succession planning, key person, both, what have you. But on the personal planning side, you need money to, it's ABC. You need enough money to pay debts, leave money to kids for college or Head Start to life or whatever, and then replace your income or provide an income for surviving spouse and children for X amount of years, right? So I'll kind of walk you through my thought process with it. And so I have $5 million worth of life insurance on myself. Most people, when I tell them that, their initial thought is, what a ridiculous amount of life insurance. I think when I walk you through my thought process with it, you could even make the argument that I'm underinsured. So my wife used to be a chemical engineer. She now stays home with the kids. She's a domestic engineer. We have 2 kids, and I got this pre-kids. We planned on having 2 kids, and so I took all this into consideration at the time. So I've always wanted my wife to continue to stay home until the kids are out of the house. And then if she wants to go back to work, she can get back to work anytime, but she has no aspirations of that, and that's fine. But but let's say that was as far as I thought it through. So I need enough money to pay debts, leave money to kids, and provide her income for, let's say, the next 20 years. Well, let's say that happens. I die, I leave enough money for those things. Well, in 20 years, she's in her mid 50s in 20 years, has to go back to work after being out of the workforce for 20, 30 years. So she's not going to get the job that she was once qualified for. She's got to start saving for her own retirement starting in her 50s. This is not exactly the position of power I put her in. Or she goes back to work. She kind of sees the writing on the wall, understands what awaits for her, and goes back to work before the kids are out of the house. And then I didn't really accomplish what's really important to me, which is for her to solely focus on the kids always, but especially if I'm not in the picture anymore, right?
Sure.
So ideally, if I want to accomplish what's really important to me, I have enough money to pay debts, leave money to kids, and provide her with an income for potentially the next 60 years, which puts her in her 90s. So $5 million, all things considered, and stretched over a potentially 60-year period of time, you could argue, not all that much money. Now, that's what's important to me, and that's what I want to accomplish and all this stuff. So I'm not saying that that's what everybody needs to go get $5 million worth of life insurance. So again, part A, if you were to have to write a check to pay off all your debts, what does that look like? Put that next to part A. Part B, kind of a loaded question that don't overthink it too much. But if you were to leave money to the kids, what would it be for? How much would it be per child? Let's say nice, easy numbers. Let's say that you wanted to leave $100,000 per child and you have 2 kids. So then 100,000 times 2, part B, 200,000. And part C would be, how much income would you like to leave for your surviving spouse and or children, and for how long? So again, nice, easy numbers. If it was 100,000 a year for 20 years, 100,000 times 20, you put that in part C. You add those up. That gives you your life insurance need. Go out and get you some life insurance, right? Call whoever you use, get you the life insurance. I generally will encourage people start with term, because right now what's most important is that you get the amount of life insurance that you need. Type is second, right? So if you were to die and your wife collected a check, she's not going to care if it's term or whole life or universal or any of the stuff. She's just going to want to make sure that it's enough, right? So get the amount that you need. Term is the cheapest way to do that. Now you can get terms that you are able to convert into something permanent at some point down the road. So if that's something that you think you want to entertain at some point, which generally speaking most people do, make sure you get a term that you're able to convert into something permanent at some point down the road. Now that's a big rabbit trail we could go down as far as the different types and how they work and all the stuff. won't get into that, but just saying.
Sure.
That's an easy back of the napkin thing that anybody can do to calculate their life insurance need based on their specific wants and needs.
Okay. I'm making myself a note here that we should talk about insurance types.
Okay.
Because I feel like that would be, because I'm sitting here going, I know what kind I have. I don't know if it's the right kind. Well, and I guess they're all, to your point, if there's a check at the end, they're the right kind, but
Right.
it's how you get there, and maybe there's a lot of other things we can get into, but I was just briefly making myself a note so it didn't just vanish off into the ether.
Sure. Want to know one thing too, and if there's anything you want to talk about, the wealth manager versus financial planner, but I know one thing too is the attorneys. So if we have time to get into that, we can.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And again, so talking about business and personal or estate, it seems like these other professions we're talking about, one can kind of act like the other, or they think they're filling some of the roles of the other. When you get into attorneys, my experience has been they're pretty defined on whether they're on the business or corporate side, or they're on the personal or estate planning side. Has that been your experience?
Yeah, so usually they'll have their areas of expertise of things that they'll do. And I think it's very important that whatever type of attorney that you need for whatever your specific circumstances are, that you make sure the attorney that you're using specializes in that particular thing. And so an example of why that's important, we worked, a firm hired a local firm here, hired us a couple years ago to help them with their buy sell planning and things like that. There was three partners, three owners, younger guys, and they're growing aggressively. They're doing really well. And so that was one of the main things I wanted to help with. I wanted to help with business planning in general, but that was one of their main concerns. That's kind of what got us there. So I was like, great. Well, do you have an operating agreement, buy sell agreement, things like that? Let's take a look at it and we'll go from there. So they gave us their operating agreement that also acted as their buy sell. So we took a look at it, and I was looking at it and I was like, this doesn't look great, but I'll have one of the attorneys on my team take a look at it as well. So I gave it to one of the attorneys on my team. They took a look at it. And so when we had a meeting to discuss it, the attorney was like, hey, so who did this buy-sell agreement? And I was like, I don't know. I just asked them if they had one, and this is what they gave me. And they were like, all right, well, did they have an attorney do it, or did they do it themselves? And I was like, it's a good question. I'll ask them next meeting. And so they were like, well, because I'm having a hard time believing an attorney did this. So during the next meeting, I had to kind of find a tactful way to be like, hey guys, who did the operating / buy sell agreement? And they're like, oh, so-and-so's friend, one of the partners. And I was like, is so-and-so an attorney? They're like, yeah. I was like, does he specialize in this type of work? They're like, no, he's a real estate attorney, but we just needed to get it done really quickly. And I was like, okay, because my team thought that y'all did it yourselves, right? Because it's going to need to be redone. I don't know how to say it very well. It's not well done. It needs to be redone. So, sure. Here's the contact information for a couple corporate attorneys who can help you with those things. So yeah, I think most business owners, you need to have a good corporate attorney who can help you with things like your operating agreement, articles of incorporation, ideally help you with things like contracts and things like that you'll probably need help with. Hopefully you don't ever get into any sort of suit or something like that. But in today's environment, if you're in business, you might as well come to terms with the fact that you are likely going to get sued for some reason, whether it's a good reason or not. You're probably going to have a lawsuit at some point. But anyways, you're going to.
I feel like that falls under the. Sorry, I feel like that falls under the hope for the best, plan for the worst kind of scenario.
Yep. Yeah, it will likely happen. People are always. I might mess up the details a little bit, but I think it's just the statistics are something along the lines of America has about 80% of the world's attorneys and about 90% of the world's lawsuits. So, wow. If you're in business, people are looking. I mean, it's looked at as a lottery nowadays, right? People are hoping to get an offender
Yeah.
with
Yep.
a successful company that they can sue or something like that.
Sure.
So,
Well,
yeah,
or yeah, but there's all sorts of stuff. People should know coffee is hot, but
sure would think so.
now you got to put on the cup. Coffee's going to be hot. So
Yeah.
things like that.
Yeah. And
Now,
also
one thing I
put
would
on the
also
burger.
add, or I guess ask your, sorry,
Oh, so I was just going to say, put on the
what's
burger
that?
wrapper. Don't also eat the wrapper, right?
Yeah, there's someone will try to hit the lottery somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things I might like kind of pin in here or get your opinion on is, so a number of years ago, the lawyer we were using, the attorney we were using, was leaving the practice and he was retiring and said, hey, I'd like to introduce you to an associate. We kind of took that opportunity to maybe go talk to a few others. Said, hey, if we're meeting somebody new, let's meet several people that are new. And we ended up going elsewhere, just to someone that I felt more comfortable with, just discussing with and his experience. One thing he had said, and this may be common, but he said, I would like to look at all of your contracts, all of your legal stuff, all of your everything. I know who you're coming from, so I know it's done well, but I would like to look at it because I will be the one, if something comes up, I will be the one you'll come to asking for advice. I would really like to know what's in there. I might have a few tweaks of just how I like to operate versus how they may have liked to operate theirs. And while it doesn't change the overall spirit, it could change some of the nuance. And it ended up being great. So all the contracts, I probably sent him everything. Just too much. Here you go. There's what you need to look at.
How about it?
He came back and said, okay, well, this contract made sense. He goes, when is the last time you guys revised the contract for services? So, well, it's probably been a decade. He goes, okay, well, that makes sense. So we should probably, based on current Missouri case law, we should probably update this because, X, Y, and Z reason. So I guess the point I'm trying to make is, one, have your current attorney review all of anything you're relying on for legal standing, contract for services, or maybe like a subcontractor's agreement, if that's a thing in your state. Employment contracts, if that's a thing in your state, have your current attorney review those. One, to make sure they're on the same page of what's in there. They may have some suggestions, but two, to make sure that they're current, and then probably ask them what they would prefer to set up and I say regular update, but it could be 5 years. That could be whatever they're comfortable with in your state, but establish some sort of routine of let's go through, let's check it versus my state's case law, because that's subject to change really at any time, and make sure everything's up to date and current.
That's a really great point, and I'm glad you brought that up because yes, laws change, and I will say I think just human nature is like I already had an attorney do that, and just kind of the path of least resistance. You know what I mean? And because it's not fun stuff, and you're going to pay somebody to do it,
Sure.
and you want to save the money, you want to save the headache and all the stuff. So, but
Yeah.
boy, you're going to wish that you would have paid that money if something does happen, because a single word in a contract can change that, and laws change and things like that. So yes, to your point, absolutely. Just because you've had a contract done or you've had this, that, or the other done, whatever legal, documentation, whatever you've had done, buy, sell, same deal. I couldn't tell you how many buy, sell agreements we've looked at that a lot of times like life. So back on life insurance, a lot of times life insurance is used to fund, the buy, sell. And so we have two brothers, they're partners in a company, and they did a buy, sell probably about 10 years or so ago. And they have $500,000 worth of life insurance on each other that probably at the time was sufficient. The business is now worth, depending, somewhere between $15 to $20 million. So that $500,000 life insurance policy is not, I mean, it's better than nothing, but it ain't going to make a dent in that. So, yes, just because you have it done doesn't mean that it's done. It needs to be revisited. Yep. To your point, we generally tell clients every 5 years or so at least, or if there's triggering events, changes and things like that would prompt those changes to be made. But I'm glad, and I'm certain I'm sure you're glad that you had that attorney look over those contracts.
Yeah. Well, and this is best of my recollection because this has been a few years ago, which, note to self, probably review this. But it was something in the font, like the boldness and the font of the lien notice, that they said there's case law here that says, to be not considered fine print, it needs to be bold and it needs to be at some certain font, right? And ours, it wasn't fine print, but it also wasn't that font. So they said, okay, could it hold up? Yeah, but let's make this thing ironclad. Let's literally make this thing bold and make it font, and then the appropriate font, then we're done, right?
Yep.
Then we can be over. The other nice thing about having them know all of our documents is now it's kind of in the back of their brain. So as they're reviewing case law, current rulings, something tickles the back of their mind. They're like, wait a minute, Ozark has a contract that says something like this, or is trying to do something like this. I need to go review that and make sure that they're up to date on this, rather than them just not knowing, right? Not necessarily their fault. They just don't know what they don't know. Right. So bringing them up to speed is often, and it can be expensive, but to your point earlier, future you that is involved in something, is using this document for some reason, would probably pay 3, 4, 20 times the amount of whatever that hour was worth, or whatever the time frame, to make that problem go away. And just that, man, I really wish I had done that in the beginning.
Yeah, I mean, you got to kind of consider it insurance a little bit. So just like any other insurance, like you're getting these legal documents done, you paid to have them done, hoping that it was a waste of time and money, hoping that you never actually need to, use them or enforce them or whatever. But if you did, that attention to detail, whatever money you spend on it, all of it, any money you spent on it, is contingent upon these things being done correctly. And if not done correctly, or not updated to be currently correct, then whatever money you spent on it, you wasted your money on it, right? So it's worth having, again, in my opinion, somebody update them, make sure that, again, little kind of silly things like font size and things like that, which in the eyes of the law are not silly, but to the average person, they're like, that kind of seems dumb, but that's what you got to do, right? So worth having done.
Yep.
And same thing. So
having a conversation.
Sorry, go ahead.
Well, exactly. You beat me to the punch. Is a lot of these things that are applying to business contracts and to business law, the same principles can also apply to estate planning and also past estate planning, elder law, right? Like trying to plan for the future, and just what that looks like is, and even sometimes within on the personal side, sometimes those are different. Estate and elder law are kind of two different things too. It's just having the right professional.
Yeah, I mean, I could literally count on one hand, if I was missing some fingers, how many people have come to us and had their estate planning done and up to date. Like, it almost never happens. So either they don't have it done at all, or if they do, it's kind of wildly out of date. And everybody knows they need to get it done. Everybody's been meaning to get it done, but they don't get it done. And I think the term estate planning can be a little misleading to people, because they're like, I don't have an estate, but like every adult person technically has an estate. Every adult person needs at least basic estate planning. And there's a difference between estate planning and estate documents. The attorney, generally speaking, is there they get paid to write up the documents. So things like will, living will, powers of attorney, both healthcare and financial, maybe a trust, things like that. That is what the estate planning attorney is generally going to do. Again, in my opinion, this is not meant as any sort of slight to my estate planning friends, but most of the time, that's what they're there to do. And in my opinion, I think that there's not enough conversation and kind of pre-planning or discovery ahead of time to really kind of nail down how we want things to work, explanations of how things work, what are our goals, what's our plans, all the stuff. And there's not enough follow through on the back end to make sure that, like, great, we have estate planning documents. When we die, the do our loved ones or family members know that, number one, these things exist and where to find them? Do we know we got life insurance? Do they know that it exists and where to find it? We have bank accounts and investment accounts, and we have properties and, all the things. How do we make sure that these things bypass probate? So if anybody's familiar with that, if anybody's ever had to go through it, they will tell anybody who will listen to make sure that your parents or you or whatever have everything ironclad where it can bypass probate, because probate is expensive and arduous and otherwise just a pain in the butt that we would like to avoid if possible. And it's relatively easily avoidable just with some proper planning. So again, most of the attorneys are there to help with the estate planning documents, but us or somebody like us, generally speaking, is there to help with the estate planning. I couldn't tell you how many trusts we've seen that nothing is titled to the trust and the trust isn't made beneficiary on anything, because again, the attorney's there to write up the trust, and then, maybe they verbally told them to do XYZ, or they probably handed them a piece of paper that said, make sure you do these things, but the attorneys kind of wash their hands of it. And so that person paid presumably thousands of dollars to have a trust created, but now it's just an empty shell that might as well have saved their money, because again, nothing is titled to it, nothing is going to it upon death. Like, they might as well have not had it. So you gotta make sure that, again, the things that I'm talking about as far as estate planning that are separate from what the attorney would do is make sure you have what we call a master file. So in other words, everything in one place that somebody were to need if you were to pass away. Copies of estate planning documents, information on life insurance, bank accounts, investment accounts, properties, passwords if needed, all the stuff, everything that would be needed if you were to pass away, so things can go as smoothly as possible. Make sure that all your beneficiaries are listed and up to date and done the way that you want them to be done. I couldn't tell you how many widows that we've had to work with that I'll give you an example. A young one, this was years ago, girl was, 30-ish, had, I think, a 4-year-old daughter at the time, young husband passed away. The life insurance he had through work, he left his parents as beneficiary on that, so they got that money. And his ex-wife was listed as his beneficiary on his 401k. So she got nothing, and legally had no recourse or anything that could be done, and beneficiary designations will override whatever it says in your estate planning documents. So if you had in your will, let's say, that you wanted everything to go to your spouse, but you had your brother listed as beneficiary on your life insurance, your brother's getting your life insurance. Your spouse doesn't have any recourse to that money. Doesn't matter what your will or any of your estate planning documents said. So it's very important to cross all the T's and dot all the I's. I couldn't tell you how many times we've had to, help a client go through probate on a couple $1,000s in mom's bank account because she didn't have what's called a POD, or paid on death listed, which is basically a beneficiary designation. So there are all these little kind of loose ends, or that can be loose ends, that again, we don't know what we don't know. So people just, don't know X, Y, Z. And so every state's a little bit different on this one, but in the state of Florida, even if you have it in your will or estate planning documents that you want your home to go to, let's say your children, it will go through Florida probate first, unless you have what's called a ladybird deed listed, which is basically a beneficiary designation for the home. It'll bypass probate, go to whoever you want it to go to, or it's in a trust, which again would bypass probate and go to the trust and all these things. So again, it's a big surprise to just about all the clients we work with in Florida. They were like, oh, I didn't know that that's the way that worked. How come nobody's ever told me about this? Yeah. And they don't, they're gone by the time anybody realizes it, and then it's too late, and we got to go through probate on the house.
Well, in talking about Florida property, Florida is one of those places, and there's other states, but Florida seems to be a state where a lot of people will have like second homes or vacation homes or something like that. So that would probably also be a point to say, just because you don't live in this, you need to have a state specific attorney look at something, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if you're in, Ohio and you've got a place in Florida, you should probably talk to a Florida attorney just to say, what do we need to do to make this right in your state? Because in my mind, and again, this is a fence guide, so take this for what it's worth. But if they pass away and they live in Ohio, they earn in Ohio, everything is in Ohio, but they've got this asset in Florida, it's probably going to be covered by Florida law, wouldn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'll give you a great, I know we're kind of running out of time. I'll give you a great, maybe this is a good one to end on. I'll give you a great story / example of why the estate planning is important, not just the estate documents. So have a client, local guy, successful business guy, and he has a dad who is a staunch do-it-yourselfer. His dad at the time was 82 or 84. Hand files his own taxes, manages his own investments, all the stuff. And he was like, I'm the executor of my dad's estate. He's a staunch do-it-yourselfer. I know he's done fairly well for himself, but I'm just afraid I'm going to have to deal with a real mess if, when my dad passes away. Yeah. And I would love to avoid that if possible, but I just would never get him to be able to come see somebody like you. Like that's just not his, that's not his style. And I was like, all right, well, look, do you think you could get him here for just a conversation under the pretext of like, I'm not going to try to make him a client or anything. And so he's like, oh, it's worth a shot. So he got his dad here. His dad's, drop my mic. His dad's sitting here like this the whole time, literally was like, I don't know why we're here. There's not a problem that needs to be solved. He literally said, I'm going to live to be 105. Like there's, he's like, I don't know why we're wasting everybody's time. After kind of some brief conversation, come to find out he's got about $2 million in IRAs. He's got $2 million worth of about 50 individual stocks. He's got a property in New York. He lives here in Florida. He's got a property in New York. And so part of his estate planning, so he did a couple years prior go see an estate planning attorney and get his estate documents done, including a trust. And he's got 3 kids, my client being one of them. He's got 3 kids that he was going to leave the IRA money to the kids. He's got a couple charities that he had as part of his estate plan that he was going to leave the stocks to the charities. And he had, I believe, a dozen grandkids that he was going to leave about $8,000 a piece to. So after kind of hearing this and having a brief conversation, so he had the trust, nothing was titled to the trust. That was one of those examples of like, all right, he paid to have the trust done, but he might as well have saved the money because it's a useless shell of it, So I kind of laid out, I was like, all right, well, look, here's what's going to happen. You pass, you're leaving heavily taxed things to your kids. You're leaving the stocks to the charities, that each one of these stocks, the way that they sit now, each one of these stocks individually, each one of the 50 or so stocks individually are going to have to be probated. The property in New York is going to have to go through probate in New York. So your son is probably going to have to make a trip to New York to get all this squared away. You have this trust, nothing is titled to the trust. Why do you even pay to have it done, kind of a thing? And so the client, the son, was like, all right, look, I will pay you to get all this, squared away. And so that's what we do. Yeah. So the problem seemed complex. The fix was relatively simple. I was like, look, you either need to sell the property in New York or put it in a trust. The 50 individual stocks, let's open up an account in the trust's name, move those over to the trust. That's non-taxable. We're just, transferring it to that account, continue to self-manage them, right? Like I'm not, trying to manage them for you, continue to self-manage them. So that way it'll bypass probate. Let's have the stocks go to the kids because they'll get to step up in basis and not have to pay taxes on those stocks when they inherit them. Let's have the charities inherit the IRAs because they don't have to pay taxes on the IRAs because they're charities. And let's go ahead and write $8,000 checks to all of the dozen, grandkids and get them off of the estate planning documents. Because what would happen is, again, all those things would have to go through probate. My client would have a dozen grandkids and a couple charities all breathing down his neck for their part of the estate upon his passing. And the probate process might be a multi-year process. So we got it all squared away, relatively simple. And I believe it was that year around the holidays or the following year around the holidays that Dad passed away. So he didn't make it to 105. The client called me to kind of let me know, give me that news and kind of, have some conversations about stuff. And he was like, I'd be curious, you don't happen to know about how much money that saved us in like taxes and probate costs, and I was like, no, but, that's got me curious too. I want to go back and put pen to paper on it. So I did, and I called him back. And I was like, well, between taxes and, estimated probate costs, it saved you over $600,000, paying us a couple $1,000 and saving the estate over $600,000 in taxes and fees. So, he was thrilled about that. But point is even for the do-it-yourselfers, I think it's worth paying a firm to just put a second set of eyes on stuff. We just can't assume things are done. We paid money to get this done. Let's be sure it's done correctly, or else we wasted our money.
100%. Andrew, I think that's a great point to wrap this up on, is that you need to have somebody quarterback this. And whether it is you're doing your own stuff, and then, if you feel up to the challenge, then go for it. But at least have somebody look at it to say, hey, I've seen a situation like this before. Have you, just making sure you've thought about these things and how they're coming. As long as you have and you've got a plan, go for it. If you need advice, I'm here for it. Or someone else that says, I don't know what I'm doing. I feel like I've got all the right pieces. I just don't know if they fit together the way I think they're going to. Having someone that has been there and done that and assembled this thing, obviously, I mean, in this example, saved a tremendous amount of money. It can save money. It can save time and stress. If he were trying to sort all that out on himself, not only is there the money, the tax implications and whatnot, but there's also the potential trip to New York. There's also just figuring this out in a time that is already stressful. Like, this isn't a peaceful time. It's going through personal emotions and now dealing with all this. And one specific example, sure, but I feel like everyone watching at home can probably relate to it in one way or another, cast it under their own lens and see that it probably still fits.
Yeah. And, again, I'll say it again. It doesn't have to be, we're happy to work with whoever, but there's other firms who work like us. There's not a lot of them. Again, most of them are going to work under the more traditional model, but I would say do your due diligence. Fine, if you want to find somebody local to you, find somebody local to you, but make sure you're asking the right questions. Make sure that they work in such a way that is conducive to what you want to do. But we have do-it-yourselfer clients who are like, again, I think I'm doing it right. I want a professional second set of eyes. We look over things. We say, hey, let's do X, Y, Z. Or, you work on, if you want to continue to do it yourself, you do X, Y, Z. And they're like, good, that's what I needed. That's the information I needed. I'm going to go, I got it from here, kind of a thing, right? So, again, there are firms like that are just there to act as that second set of eyes and kind of the professional overseer, if you will, and then continue to let you do your own thing, or, they'll help you if you want them to. But, I think the second set of eyes is super important.
It'd be huge. And if nothing else, maybe everything's correct. Maybe all the T's are crossed and the I's are dotted, but just that reassurance to say, you're good. You've got it figured out. Like, go forth and prosper, sort of thing. Just the peace of mind alone would probably be worth it.
Amen. Yes, sir.
Absolutely. Andrew, feels like a great place to wrap this up. So, guys, to recap, make sure you know the difference between an investment manager and a financial planner. One can operate as the other, but the other can't really operate as one can operate as both. But anyway, you guys get it. But then also the difference in attorneys between business and estate, and even still estate and elder, just for planning on next stages of life, that sort of thing. Make sure you've got the right professional in the right space. And I'm all for having friends and I'm all for using friends, but make sure the friends are, they are good at that area of their business.
Absolutely.
All right, guys, just to put a bow on this, make sure we conclude it correctly. you've got to know the difference between an investment planner and a financial planner, an investment manager and a financial planner, and make sure your attorneys specialize in the things that you're asking them to do, whether it's a business attorney and then an estate attorney, or even an estate attorney and an elder law attorney. Make sure everyone knows what their role is. Make sure they're all well-versed in it. Make sure you've got the right team members in the right spot when you're assembling this financial dream team. And ultimately make sure the team's got a quarterback that knows what each person's doing, what role they're filling, so that as they're navigating you through this road of life, that you're making sure you get there in an efficient manner, in a safe manner, really, without too many detours. Hopefully you don't end up in Tijuana, you end up in New York.
That's right.
Guys, thank you so much for your time. If there's any questions, please drop them in the comments below. Either one of us would be happy to answer whatever questions you might have. For now, Joe Everest, the fence expert, reminding you that good fences make good neighbors.